Today, we are going on an incredible journey to answer a really fundamental question. Where does the energy for life actually come from? It's a question that connects every living thing, from you and me to the smallest bacterium. So let's start the quest. You know that feeling, right? Your heart is pounding, you're breathing hard, and you can feel this wave of heat coming off your body. Well, that whole sensation, that's the echo of a tiny chemical reaction happening trillions of times over inside your cells. Let's trace it all the way back to its source. Okay, so first things first, let's clear up something that trips a lot of people up. We often say respiration when we mean breathing. But in biology, breathing is just the delivery service, getting the oxygen in and the carbon dioxide out. The real action, the main event, is cellular respiration. That's the chemical wizardry happening inside every single one of our cells that turns food and oxygen into actual usable energy. So here's our roadmap for this quest. We're going to figure out what respiration really is, then we'll follow the energy to a critical fork in the road, the two very different paths our cells can take. We'll even see how plants fit into this whole story before we wrap up by putting our knowledge to the test. So let's start with the absolute basics. What exactly is this process that's so incredibly important for, pretty much every form of life on Earth? At its heart, cellular respiration is a process of breaking things down. Scientists call it catabolic. It takes a big sugar molecule from your food, uses oxygen to crack it open, and breaks it down into simple carbon dioxide and water. Now, the prize for all this work is energy. And that energy comes out in two forms: a little chemical battery called ATP that powers everything your cells do, and heat, which is exactly why you feel warm after a workout. You could get energy from a sugar cube by just lighting it on fire, but you'd get a wild, uncontrolled flame. Our bodies are so much more elegant than that. Instead of one big, fiery explosion, our cells release that exact same amount of energy in a whole series of slow, careful, controlled steps. And they do it all at body temperature, inside the watery world of our cells. It's like a tiny, perfectly managed fire happening billions of times a second. Okay, so here's where things get really interesting. Once that glucose molecule gets inside one of your cells, it arrives at a major fork in the road. And the path it takes next all hinges on whether one key molecule is around. And this is what that fork in the road looks like. The first step is always the same. The glucose molecule gets split in half. But after that, the cell has to make a choice. Is there oxygen available? If the answer is yes, it goes down one path. If the answer is no, it takes a completely different route. This one decision point changes everything. So let's take the first path, the one where there's plenty of oxygen to go around. This is the cell's energy superhighway. It is by far the most efficient route to get the job done. You can think of aerobic respiration like a 3-act play. Act 1 is glycolysis, where the glucose is split. But the real show begins inside the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell. In the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, the cell just systematically wrings out every last drop of energy, producing a huge amount of ATP from that one little sugar molecule. But what happens when you're sprinting for that finish line, or lifting something really heavy, and your body just can't pump oxygen to your muscles fast enough? Well, the cell doesn't just shut down, it switches to an emergency backup plan. If you have ever felt that deep, burning sensation in your muscles after a really tough workout, well, you have personally experienced the side effects of this emergency route. The reason why lies in what this anaerobic, or oxygen-free, process leaves behind. So when oxygen gets scarce, your muscles pivot. They switch to lactic acid fermentation. It's a much quicker way to get a burst of energy, but it's not very efficient. And the trade-off is that it creates a byproduct, lactic acid. And it's the buildup of this acid that causes that familiar muscle burn and soreness during intense exercise. And what's really cool is that we humans aren't the only ones with an anaerobic plan B. Like our source material points out, yeast does something very similar called alcoholic fermentation. When it runs out of oxygen, it produces ethanol and carbon dioxide instead of lactic acid. And for centuries, we've cleverly taken advantage of this little organism's emergency plan to make our bread rise and to brew beer and wine. All right, let's completely switch gears and talk about plants. We all learn in school that plants make oxygen. But let me ask you this. Do they also use oxygen? In other words, do plants breathe? This is such a classic point of confusion. We think of plants as little oxygen factories, and it's easy to forget that they're living things that need energy too.
So let's put the two processes side by side to make this crystal clear.
It really is a beautiful kind of symmetry. Photosynthesis uses sunlight to build up a sugar molecule. Respiration then breaks down that same sugar molecule to release energy. The most important difference here is the timing. Photosynthesis only happens when there's light. But plants are respiring all the time, 24/7, day and night, to power their own life processes, just like we are. Okay, we have followed the energy quest from the very beginning all the way to the end. We've seen the crossroads, the superhighways, the emergency routes. Now, let's make sure all that knowledge sticks with a few questions, just like the ones you might see on an exam. First up, an assertion-reason question. The assertion is, we feel warm during strenuous exercise. The reason given is, cellular respiration increases to meet energy demand, releasing excess energy as heat. So is the reason a correct explanation for the assertion? Yep, absolutely. They are directly connected. To get more energy, you have to run that chemical reaction more often, and a key byproduct of that reaction is heat. Simple as that. How about a case study? A baker's dough doesn't rise because it's left in a really cold room. What part of the yeast's energy quest went wrong and why? Well, the key thing to remember is that yeast is a living thing, and its enzymes, the little workers doing the job, are really sensitive to temperature. It was just too cold for them to work properly, so they couldn't perform anaerobic respiration fast enough to make the CO2 gas needed to make the dough rise. All right, let's do some rapid-fire MCQs. Number 1, the main site of aerobic respiration. That's got to be C, the mitochondria, the powerhouse. Number 2, which process does not require oxygen? That would be B, glycolysis, the very first step that happens no matter what. And number 3, the end product of anaerobic respiration in our muscles is? That's C, lactic acid, the stuff that causes the burn. How'd you do? And finally, here are a few short answer questions to really cement your understanding. I want you to see if you can write out that full, balanced chemical equation, explain the huge difference in energy output between the two paths, and describe why one process is catabolic and the other is anabolic. Go ahead and pause here and give it a shot.
And that brings our explainer to a close. So we end with this final thought. This quest for energy, this complex dance of molecules, isn't just a human story or a plant story. It's happening right now in almost every living thing on this planet. It's a shared chemical blueprint, a brilliant reminder that at the most fundamental level, we are all connected, all powered by the very same incredible spark of life.